All right, let's call meeting to order.
Okay. Member Lieberman is absent. Member Rose Shears?
Yes.
Member Larson?
Yes.
Member Bierce?
Yes.
Member Vahil McClanahan is also absent. Member Melgen?
Yes.
And Chair Hodges.
Yes. All right. We'll first start with the call to order and the land acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lijon. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together builds a better future for all that now make this their home. All right. With that, we'll move on to approval of the minutes.
Are there any questions or edits on the minutes?
I want to make a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Okay. Member Rose Shears?
Yes.
Member Larson?
Yes.
Member Bierce?
Yes.
Member Melgen?
Yes.
Chair Hodges.
Yes. All right. We'll now move on to public comment for items not on the agenda.
Good evening, commissioners and staff. I'm Peggy McQuaid, the current mayor of Albany, and I wanted to take a few minutes out of your time this evening to personally say thank you to you, for each one of you, for your service to our community. It is not always easy to come to these meetings once a month, and it's not always easy to take the time to prepare and do all the work that's necessary before a meeting. The Climate Action Committee serves as the green conscience for our community. During this time of unprecedented environmental protection rollbacks and disdain coming out of the federal government, your work is more important than ever. You meet these challenges professionally and with passion. You impact our entire community, uplifting the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan and bringing forward heat pump rebates, ensuring that all members of our community are able to participate. Multi-family EV charging stations, and block of electrification. Your work is truly appreciated. I wish you all success as you continue to work on the environmental issues in our community. Thank you.
Lucinda Young, your time starts now.
Hi, this is Lucy Young. Thank you. There was a delay in the unmute button coming up on the screen, just for your information. So it was wonderful to hear from our mayor today. Really appreciated having her at the meeting. I wanted to express, first of all, it's really great to have a meeting. As I believe all of you know, I'm a member of the Albany Climate Action Coalition, and we have been concerned about the number of meeting cancellations there have been recently. We completely understand that meetings sometimes have to be canceled. People get sick, things come up, but it just seems like there have been a lot of cancellations lately. The meeting in December was canceled. Then we had a great meeting in January, and the meeting in February was canceled. It's great to be here tonight, but then I understand that the meeting next month is being canceled. So the monthly meetings are becoming more like every other monthly meetings. And we are in a dire climate emergency, as I know everyone here is aware. We're feeling the effects of it today. We're having a unprecedented heat wave across the Southwest. My daughter, who we just returned from Phoenix, who she's in college, they're having triple digits in March. So we are all feeling the impacts. And we think there is a lot to talk about, a lot to work on. And again, we understand that sometimes meetings have to be canceled, but we would like to aim for monthly meetings on a regular basis. And I understand that it takes a lot of time to prepare, but even if it's just a brief update, and I know Michelle is one person, but even if it's just a brief update and giving the community an opportunity to express concerns and suggestions, that would be really appreciated. Thank you very much.
Nick Peterson, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Nick Peterson, also with the Climate Action Coalition. I want to second what Lucinda said, and also I want to thank the mayor for speaking to you. I also was on the Climate Action Committee for a while, and it's a lot of work. And the challenge to bring forward ideas and policies, they're complicated, they're interlinked with other issues that make them unpopular, like increasing costs and making people do things that cost them money. But the other thing is, you know, we kind of heard this when we were at the city council meeting at the beginning of the week, where people seemed, you know, they made a good presentation on the strategic plan covering number one priority, which is reduction of emissions and addressing climate change. So these are big, serious, important issues. And I think something that the Climate Action Committee might need to bring up and discuss in the future is whether just having this burden on a committee is the appropriate way to do this. It seems like, especially with meetings being canceled, one of the meeting canceled because no issues on the agenda, which is the issue that should be number one on the agenda all the time is it's a crisis and we need to do something. So even kicking around brainstorming ideas is worth doing. But I just really encourage you to maybe think about, you know, is the committee the right place, or is this something that needs to be an ongoing effort within the city government itself that is correctly staffed? I know I hear all the time, there's no money, there's no this, we need to do that. But I mean, even putting on little events for the city that are fun pale in comparison to doing things that, you know, address this issue. Things that we do now will have huge impact into the future. The emissions going into the atmosphere, they're going to be there. The carbon's going to hang around for thousands of years. It's not like it'll just go away in a few days. So reducing emissions is really critical. I mean, we need to think about how to do this. Anyway, I think putting some stronger efforts into making the city a leader in this area would be very helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay. That's all the comments. We'll now move on to presentation, starting with item 4.1, the Watershed Management Plan presentation.
So we're really happy to be joined today by a whole contingent from Public Works, including some consultants. This here is David Lamb, who's the project manager for the Watershed Management Plan, and I'll hand it off to him to introduce himself and the project a little bit more.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. Good evening, Climate Action Committee. I'm really thrilled to be here tonight to talk about an important topic. The city is in the process of updating its watershed management plan, and this plan serves as really the foundation for decision-making about the city's drainage system. So I'm going to start off with some introductions, and then what I'll do is I'll pass it on to our consultants who have been working on this important issue to go through topics related to the watershed management plan, including the hydraulic modeling that's been going into it, as well as how we incorporate climate science into that hydraulic modeling. So I hope you find this an interesting topic. If you go to the next slide for the introductions. One more, please. So again, I'm David Lamb. I'm Associate Engineer with City of Albany Public Works. I've been with Public Works for 4 years now, and I am the project lead for this update on the city side. Joining with me tonight is Camila Correa. You'll hear from her next. She's with Wood Rogers, who is our primary consultant that's been updating the watershed management plan on our behalf. Camila is a project engineer and serving as a deputy project manager for Wood Rogers. And also joining me tonight is Keely Pretzlov with Pathways Climate Institute. And Pathways Climate Institute is serving as the subject matter expert for climate science related to the effort for the watershed management plan update. So her topic will be how we incorporate both the science, future scenarios, and we're thrilled to have her with us as well. I'll go ahead and go to the next slide. I think here I'll pass the mic over to Camila, who will start talking about watershed management plan, what it is, and continue on from there. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, David, for the introduction, and good evening, members of the council. So before we jump into the topic of today's presentation, I do want to give a quick overview of what the project objectives are. So we're doing a comprehensive watershed management plan, and that includes a capacity assessment of the city drainage infrastructure. And from that, we'll be producing a capital improvement program that focuses on the capacity of the system. We're also doing a condition assessment of the stormwater infrastructure, and from that, we'll be giving a O&M, so operations and maintenance, as well as the structural rehab plan. We're also coordinating with neighboring agencies for shared assets and potential regional projects. We're incorporating climate change adaptation analysis, and we're helping the city with strategies to meet updated regulatory requirements. And we're pairing all of that with a detailed financial analysis so we can support the city in the implementation of all of those programs. Next slide. So jumping on to the topic for today's meeting, we're going to be focusing on the capacity assessment. And here we're going to be talking about our hydraulic and hydrologic model and our calibration effort. The key element here is that the model that we've built is a tool that we use to identify deficiencies and vulnerabilities, and that can be used to inform decisions. Then we can use that model to make predictions of how the future climate will impact the city and help the city prepare for that. And then climate pathways, Keely here will be diving into the climate science. Next slide. So jumping into our model calibration, I want to highlight here the importance of the calibration effort. And we do this step so we can understand the behavior of the system and make sure that we can replicate it in our model. This is to say we want to build confidence in the model so that we can use it as a reliable tool to predict current and also future flooding. So for this effort, we worked with the city to install 3 gauges around the watershed, and we supplemented that with additional gauges within Berkeley to have an understanding of the entire watershed. We collected rainfall for the winter storm of last year of 2025, shown in the slide. We collected rainfall from the East Bay Municipal Utility District and flow and depth data from the gauges. So besides the technical data that support us in doing our quantitative calibration, we also collected anecdotal data from city staff through work orders, so locations that experience frequent flooding, frequent calls for repairs, and we also attended 2 community engagement sessions to gather data from residents. So we want to make sure our understanding of the system also incorporates people's lived experiences here, so locations that are frequently flooding, frequently causing issues for residents here. We want to incorporate that into our understanding. So jumping into the calibration. Next slide, please. We started our calibration with calibrated hydrologic parameters from adjacent watersheds that we've done through other projects. We then further refined that with local data. So there were two major components here. One of them was the tree canopy. So
What does I and I stand for on the chart?
infiltration and inflow. Yeah. The first component was the tree canopy. So we know Berkeley and Albany have generally higher tree coverage than other municipalities. And it was important to include that in our hydrologic analysis because tree canopy can intercept rainfall and reduce the amount of runoff that is produced within the watershed. The second component is the groundwater I&I, which stands for infiltration and inflow. So as we know, Albany has low-lying areas that have elevated groundwater tables. So that volume from the groundwater can seep into the stormwater assets and increase the amount of flow that is observed. So those two components were important to incorporate into our calibration. Next slide. So here's an example of our calibration effort. This is the Marine Creek at Jackson intersection. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be walking through the components of this. We have first rainfall at the top. Previous? Yeah. Rainfall at the top, which is shown in an intensity. It's inches per hour. This is for the storm that happened in February 4th, 2025. Next component is the measured depth at the gauge. That's measured in feet. It's at the solid blue line. Next slide. Then we have our initial calibration results shown in the dashed red line. So as you can see, the red line's generally following the pattern, the hydraulic response of the watershed, but we're missing some of the volume, some of the high peaks within that storm. So through our iteration, our refinement of the calibration, we got to the black line. Next slide, please. So that's our final calibration result. We're matching very accurately the response of the watershed within our model. And all of this is to say we're building confidence in that the model can replicate the existing conditions and the real world within the model. Next slide. So this is another example here. This gauge is in Codornices Creek. So again, we have our initial calibration shown in red and our final calibration shown in black. So we're matching that response really accurately. We're building trust in our model. Next slide. And with that, I'll pass it to Keely. She was going to talk about the climate science as it relates to stormwater.
Thanks, Camilla. So I wanted to, now that you have an overview of the model and how it's intended to be used, I wanted to go over why and how we're building climate models, future condition projections into the model so that it can best represent conditions today and in the future. So the two main ones that we're looking to add to this modeling effort is first understanding how sea level rise can impact outfalls and reduce the storm drain capacity, particularly along the shoreline. So as sea levels rise, they block the outlet and the water is unable to drain as efficiently, and the water can actually even back up into the pipe and cause that kind of tailwater impacts kind of further up in the system as well. We also are including in this study an understanding of how precipitation patterns will change in the future. So understanding that existing capacity limited storm drains under today's precipitation patterns may get worse in the future as precipitation gets more extreme and becomes more frequent. More extreme rainfall becomes more frequent. Next slide, please. So for this study, we used a couple of climate planning scenarios. So we're looking first at two time horizons. The first being 2055 as a 30-year infrastructure design life of new infrastructure. So if you build it today, you need to think about, we should think about what the climate conditions are going to be 30 years from now, throughout the entire life of that infrastructure. We're also looking at 2085 as the long-term functional lifespan for underground infrastructure. Often you design something for 30 years, but it ends up staying in the ground longer than 30 years. So we're including a longer time span to account for that as well. And the plot here on the slide is looking at carbon emissions on the y-axis and time, decades, on the x-axis here. And OPC has 5 climate models kind of follow 5 socioeconomic pathways and carbon emission scenarios that range from kind of best case, globally we reduce carbon emissions as best as we can and we fully recover from climate change, to the worst case scenario, nothing really happens. And that goes from the blue line at the bottom of the plot to the red line in terms of carbon emission scenarios. For a lot of climate adaptation planning processes, we want to include a range of those scenarios because we don't know what's really going to happen in terms of carbon emissions and how that's going to affect the climate. So in this case, we're using that intermediate scenario as kind of the middle of the road scenario. That's called SSP 2-4.5. And then the very high scenario, or SSP 8.5 as the worst case scenario. Next slide, please. And then how these map to sea level rise is somewhat complex because sea level rise scenarios are often parameterized in a different way. But for this study, we are looking at 3 sea level rise scenarios specifically that map to the same range of the overall carbon emission scenarios that we're using, but that include what are called low confidence processes. Climate scientists are not really looking at the range of possible scenarios. The big unknown question right now is what's going to happen with ice sheet melting, and that those are often termed low confidence processes. And so in this case, for sea level rise scenario, we are including the low confidence processes, which then bump us up to assuming that the ice sheets will melt to a more extreme extent. So that puts us in an intermediate to high scenario range for sea level rise projection. So in this area for 2050 and 2085, that means a range of 1 foot of sea level rise to 4.7 feet of sea level rise on the table here.
What is MHHW on that slide?
Mean higher high water. Yeah, so that's one way to identify like a mean sea level. There's, tides mean that sea level fluctuates a lot, but mean higher high water is the highest of the mean high waters. Yep. Any other questions? Okay, next slide, please. And then the other component, like I said earlier, is parameterizing the extreme precipitation in the model. And Pathways Climate Institute has, as a part of a larger Bay Area study, looked at improving NOAA Atlas 14 scaling factors for future conditions for precipitation. They have a global or a national data set for understanding how precipitation patterns may change, but the consensus on the climate science on those scaling factors is that they're quite outdated. They're based, some of them are decades old, depending on where in the country you look. And so Pathways completed a study looking at adjusting those scaling factors for the Bay Area. And so we have provided Wood Rogers' team the Albany-specific scaling factors for Albany. And in this plot here, you can see on the y-axis, a precipitation depth in inches. And on the x-axis, a duration of a storm. So a 15-minute storm, 30-minute storm, 2-hour storm, all the way up to a 24-hour storm. So, and when you can see in the blue, orange, and gray bars is that historical precipitation depth is smaller than the projected precipitation depth for SSP for mid-century and late-century conditions, 2055, 2085, for that worst-case scenario. So you're seeing an increase in the precipitation totals.
All right, what is MAP and IDF?
IDF, intensity, duration, frequency curve. And so IDF is about is the combination of the intensity, so how much rain fell, duration is in what, how often did it fall, no, how long did it fall for? And then frequency is how often does that occur? Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Map mean annual precipitation. So Albany, the city, there's several annual average rainfall patterns depending on elevation away from the shoreline, and that's parameterized in the stormwater model. And so this example is just for a mean annual precipitation of 24 inches, but that varies across the city. And we have plots like these for each of the mean annual precipitation regions in the city of Albany. Next slide. And with that, I'll hand it back to Camille.
Thank you, Keely. So now that we have both components, we have a calibrated model and we have the climate science. Let's look at what the floodplains look like. But before we look at the projected floodplains, let's look at the existing floodplains so we can compare the difference. So what is shown here is a 10-year floodplain for the current climate. And our model reflects the hydraulic interactions between the storm drain network, the channels, the street network, and the tidal boundary conditions. So we're showing all of that interaction within the floodplain. I want to highlight a couple things. So next slide, please.
All right, what is WSE on that slide?
Sorry?
Bay WSE.
Water surface elevation. Okay, so one of the sources from flooding that we see here is rainfall-driven riverine flooding. So that means rainfall intensity is high and we're having spill from pipes or channels being under capacity, and that flooding spreading over land. Next slide. We can also have high tide conditions and emergent groundwater happening at the low-lying areas of the city. And sometimes the flooding can be a combination of 2 or 3 of these factors. Next slide. So what happens when we project that into the future? So this is the future 10-year storm, where we have a intermediate high scenario in 2055, which includes a 22% increase in rainfall intensity and a 1.3 increase in sea levels. So what we're seeing here, if you can go back one slide and then forward so we can see the difference. Yeah, and forward. So we're seeing greater floodplain as well as deeper floodplain coming from the riverine driven. And we're also seeing some of the Albany Bulb being overtopped by the high tailwater, the high tide, and some of the Golden Gate fields being overtopped as well. So those are the hazards that we're going to be looking at in future climate. So what's the takeaway here? This watershed management plan is an ongoing evaluation of the flood risk for current conditions. We're also doing an evaluation, next slide. We're also doing an assessment of future climate condition, which includes increased precipitation, increased sea levels, and rising groundwater tables. We're going to incorporate all of that future climate conditions to ensure that the projects that we're proposing for improvement are adaptable and provide a resilient solution for the city. So the projects that we're proposing will be able to serve the city through changing climates and through 30+ years. With that, I'll conclude.
Great, thanks so much. Any questions?
I've got a lot of questions, but first. All right, so I happened to recently read some books on rainwater capture and use of water, and questions I have are, have you analyzed the % of pervious surfaces in the city? So you looked at the tree cover, you looked at the streets and stuff, and my main kind of thinking is, you're looking at water as a problem, and I'm kind of curious how you think of water as a resource, and want to understand more about the pervious piece that you analyzed.
We are looking at impervious and pervious surfaces. We're not looking at this moment at capturing the water for reuse.
Got it. And are there, what would you say there's the soil types in Albany in terms of like clay or silt or stuff?
Yeah, mostly clay.
Okay.
It's a hydrologic soil group D based on NRCS classifications.
Cool. And a couple other questions. What was the INI again?
Inflow and infiltration.
Infill, okay.
So when you have high groundwater table and you have pipes, storm drain pipes that are beneath that groundwater table, sometimes there's cracks or there's some permeability within the concrete, and that groundwater table can infiltrate into the pipes.
Cool. And then also wanted to know if anybody here has a degree in ecology or background. Mostly it's hydrology, it sounds like. Ecology? Oh, yeah, hydrology. Hydrology, okay, thanks.
Engineer.
Pardon?
Engineer.
Engineering, got it, thanks.
I'm a principal engineer at Wood Rogers and work with Camila. My background is in surface water modeling and ecology and economics.
Cool.
I'm very in-depth with most of what the whole presentation.
Cool, thank you.
All right.
Oh,
Okay, go, Mark.
is there a problem with high runoff in the stormwater system leaking into the sanitary system?
Not that I'm aware. Maybe the city can answer that. Yeah.
Toss that over to our sewer program manager, Allison Carrillo, who's going to
Okay.
talk about that topic.
So, hi, my name is Allison Carrillo. I'm the CIP program manager. I also manage the sewer program for the last 5 or 6 years, and also an engineer. Did hydraulics, green infrastructure design for 6 years, modeling, inspection on those as well. So, to answer your question, the City of Albany is doing significant amount of sewer rehabilitation in order to resolve the I&I in the sewer system so that we don't get groundwater in there. That's a big part of our program commitments with the EPA. We have a consent decree with them to do a certain amount of linear footage per year, and we are currently ahead of schedule on that. Yeah. I'm happy to answer more questions. I would just advise that if we go too far outside of what this item is, that we might be kind of getting in a little trouble, but I'm happy to talk a little bit about how sewer and storm interact if that's the question.
I have a question either, I guess this might be for either Camila or Keely, around, yeah, it was great to see you including multiple scenarios and especially the extreme scenarios. Could you talk a little bit more about how you use the different bands of scenarios to get to your kind of ultimate recommendations?
Yeah, so we are looking at, we'll be looking at different climate scenarios, and we're also looking at different probability of storms. So we're evaluating 2-year storm. I showed the 10-year storm. We also look at the 100-year storm. So each storm is used for a different purpose. For example, the 2-year storm we're looking at for the frequent flooding. What's the flooding that's happening the most frequent almost every year, to get the understanding what's the most frequent problem. The 10-year, we're typically looking at what's the level of service that we're trying to meet. So when we're proposing projects, we want to make sure it's serviceable for the 10-year. And then the 100-year, we're looking at more a watershed scale, like a regional scale. What are the issues that we're seeing? And then on the climate side, we're also looking at a bandwidth of different scenarios for different purposes again. So looking at 2055 for nearest term adaptability, and as Keely was mentioning, 2085 for most of these infrastructure may not be replaced in 30 years. So what can we do to make sure it's serviceable for the next 50 years instead?
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think yes.
You want to add? You want to add to that?
No, if that answers his question, that's okay.
Other one? I can understand that sea level rise would raise groundwater in some parts of Albany.
Mm-hmm.
I think climate models project lower rainfall generally, so parts of Albany have maybe lower groundwater and other parts have higher groundwater. Is that a fair guess?
Not quite.
Oh, okay, thank you.
If you go back to the bar chart, the precipitation graph that I have here, generally under most climate scenarios, you may have heard some headlines that like longer duration storm events in the Bay Area, so like a 3-day storm event, the big storms, those rainfall totals generally might be about the same, or in some areas they may decrease. But what we found through the study I mentioned when I went over this slide here, that those shorter duration events, 15-minute, 1 hour, the precipitation patterns are shifting to have about the same amount of rainfall, which is why annual averages don't change that much, but they're happening in a much shorter time period. And so that actually has a greater potential for overwhelming a storm drain system like we're looking at in the study here. And then to your question about groundwater, Pathways also has worked extensively with groundwater rise data, using publicly available well data to look at historic high groundwater levels, and then adding onto that sea level rise projections. And generally, groundwater levels are anticipated to rise with sea level. It kind of attenuates away from the shoreline, of course, but right at the shoreline, you can expect near linear increases with sea level rise. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, seeing no more questions, we'll move it to public comment.
Lucinda Young, please go ahead.
This is Lucinda Young. I just want to thank you for the presentation. This is something I know very little about, and some of it is over my head, but I did learn quite a bit from the presentation. I wanted to see if I understood correctly in response to Committee Member Melgen's question about rainfall, that there is not the amount of rainfall is projected to be overall about the same, but it will come in more intense amounts, so that we're going, which creates problems. I was wondering if I'm understanding that correctly. And then I'm also wondering if, factoring in on what we can as a community do to prepare for increased flooding, are we looking at perhaps reducing the amount of hardscape and increasing the amount of permeable ground? Is that part of the plan? And maybe this is beyond the scope today, but perhaps you could tell us a little bit, what are the actions that are being taken to prepare us? Thank you.
I'll briefly answer the question about precipitation patterns. I'd have to double check the long-term numbers specifically for Albany. I don't have those in front of me, but the slide showed those increases in those shorter duration rainfall intensities for Albany. I'll also note that my email on the slides is misspelled. So it's the same spelling as my last name, but my contact information is mostly correct on the slide if you would like to reach out to me with further questions.
Sorry, I'm just going to pause for 1 sec because we have one more speaker, so I'll let them go before we finish answering questions. Sorry? What was it?
I was just letting the council answer the rest of I only answered the precipitation part of her question. No.
Oh, yeah, this is just the public comment period. So usually we have the public comment fully finished before we answer the questions. Yeah, it's okay though, no worries. But I'm just gonna pass. Okay, Nick Peterson, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting, and also, very interesting to see just how much climate change is impacting amount of rainfall. Couple questions. One is, I know Albany has not a very permeable clay type of soil, at least around where I'm at, and isn't very, does that impact into not really being able to have the soil absorb much of the additional rain? And the other question is, while we'll be seeing more rain, the mountains will be seeing less snow. Just because the temperatures aren't going to be there to create snow as climate change becomes more severe. And that's not that far off. I mean, we're already seeing it. I mean, it was a terrible ski season this time. So I'm just wondering, how does maybe potentially trying to capture some of the water, at least for use for gray water purposes, come into play, since you're talking about a 50-year system, and we'll be well into climate climate crisis type situations in that time frame. Thank you very much.
Okay, looks like we have no further public comment. We have someone in the room. That's so unusual for us. Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Wendy Bernstein. My question is, it's like a bargaining kind of question. Like, what if we did a lot of wetland restoration? Could that help? Is there room for that in Albany? Is that something that was considered in the calculations?
Thank you for your comment. Okay, I think we're done with comment. If the committee would like to hear responses to any of those questions or have kind of follow-ups, please go ahead, and then the consultants can respond.
Yeah, I'm also interested in the question about wetlands. I think that's on the climate action plan as well, of like creek-related stuff. So I'd be curious to hear if that's a consideration you looked at.
So with regards to looking at wetlands restoration, it's something that we're considering. So part of the background of this watershed management plan update is knowing that we had a lot to accomplish in a short amount of time and with limited resources as well. So in order to solve that problem, we tackled this as somewhat of a stepwise approach, where this is really laying the groundwork for future steps for managing the entire watershed citywide. So we're really trying to tackle the most critical issues with drainage and capacity and flooding across the city. And so for the first phase, that's really been the focus, is looking at where we're seeing deficiencies across the system and doing this condition assessment, building this hydraulic model that's going to serve as informing our decisions for how we tackle this. And then there are items that are on our wish list that are very important topics that unfortunately we've had to put off for a future phase when funding frees up or when we're more able to handle that. So items like wetlands restoration, improvements in our operations and maintenance. We do have we have plans to tackle those issues, but in a future phase of the watershed management plan update.
So I'm Mark Hurley, I'm the Public Works Director. Just want to touch on the creek restoration. Albany, City of Berkeley, and UC have been collaborating for a number of years, probably since early 2000s and even a little bit before that, on restoring sections of Cordonesis Creek from the railroad tracks to San Pablo Avenue. And if you look on our website, we've done at least 4 phases of restoration and trails, and there's ongoing maintenance work through our staff, UC, as well as City of Berkeley, and there's a host of volunteers. So look on our website, and there's some great information on it. And I got to give a shout out to Margot Cunningham, who runs that, as well as our open space programs and a lot of work on Albany Hill, and she manages that and is our driving force. So it's some really good work.
Great. Any more questions? Okay, with that, I guess I'll move it on to discussion from the committee here.
So I guess what's the action item that's from this? More informational presentation or the context?
Yeah, this is a presentation, only informational. If you have any commentary, you're free to share, but there's no action that needs to be taken.
Well, thanks. I have some comments. Thank you for your work. It's super cool to learn about climate science with new acronyms today. So thanks for sharing all that technical information. I'm glad we have the science in the room here. It's really important. And I'd like to just offer the framing for everybody to think about water as a resource rather than water as a problem. And reframing water as a problem to resource might, involve some drainage and some pipes and concrete, but to think about how do we slow, sink, and store the water to avoid runoff. And I know clay soils are not very, very absorbent. However, a lot of different techniques I'm sure you can research, and I can share more offline about how to increase the absorbability of soils, both for landscaping or homes, whatever use, as well as what the public commenters were saying about reducing hardscape and adding more pervious surfaces, which could take the form of potential rebates in the future for removing hardscape in your driveway, or in the form of landscaping. So East Bay Mud has these rebates for reducing water use in lawns. So what would happen if we looked at the cost of adding more concrete drainage systems and whatnot? That's like a lot of hard costs there. Also, concrete needs a lot of CO2 to produce concrete, as well as compare the cost of what's if we give everybody a rain barrel, and they're kind of small, and storms can create a lot of water very short times. But how do we slow sink and spread the water into the soil where it can stay there as a resource and for plants throughout the seasons, given that droughts might become more of an issue, to reduce the need for water from the mountains with getting less snow, as well as providing, rain capture. So you get the idea of how do we use what we have rather than just get it back into the bay and get out of the way. So I know there's always questions about rebates and how much money we have, but if we're looking at the avoided cost of building a lot of hardscape, that's something that might be a cost savings potentially opportunity there. Other places to look into research, Vancouver in Canada has some really great green infrastructure resources relating to reducing runoff through green infrastructure like bioswales, et cetera, green roofs, to limit the amount of additional pipes and stuff they have to do for the actual built environment. So thanks for the updates on the wetlands and the creeks. Really good to hear that work is happening, so thank you.
I did have one last question to city staff. Do you think you could give a little more info on kind of future timeline and ways for residents to keep staying involved as the plan updates?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So right now, going back a little bit first, this process started back in 2014, so it's been almost 2 years. And we've been spending that time doing the condition assessment, building the model, inputting the model inputs to try to truth test our model. So we're finally moving forward into putting together the full plan. We're expecting to present a draft of that later this year, towards the end of the year, say fall is the target.
That's good. All right. I think with that, we'll wrap on this item. Thanks so much for everyone to come in to present and talk about the way you're including climate in those plans. That's great.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay. With that, we can move on to item 4.2, the Community Development Director update.
Good evening. So I don't usually come here, but I figured we have a change in the chair and the vice chair. And I also had some communication with both the vice chair and the chair about how we would like to move forward with agendas and subject matter. And I think a lot of that relates also to individuals who are, have voiced their concern about meetings being canceled. So let me start with that, and then I can talk about agenda setting and subjects, et cetera. So for every commission and every council, there are times where there is not subject matter for you as the committee, council, commission, whomever, to act on or to have sort of a presentation like tonight. We just don't have it. And I respect all of your time as well as staff time. We don't create meetings simply to have meetings. We would like to get business done. And part of that business is looking at the projects that are going forward or items that need to be updated or things that need your review and recommendation or action. So I hope we won't be canceling a large number of meetings. It seems like there's been a couple recently. And there may be a couple more as we move forward through the year. But I generally, planning and zoning does the same thing. The city council generally doesn't because there's enough stuff that has to come before them, so they don't end up doing that. But planning and zoning, in fact, has canceled a number of meetings in the last 6 months because of lack of subject matter for them in which to make a decision upon. So that will continue, and I don't think it's your role or my role to simply have meetings because they're scheduled on the calendar. Of course, you know, there are instances where we might have to have special meetings. You just don't know as we're looking at projects. So I think that's where we're going with that. And with respect to agenda setting, what I would like us to do is staff would be putting together the agenda based on projects and subject matter that should come before you, and that we, the staff, would work with both the vice chair and the chair on that setting of the agenda. This does not mean that someone from the CAC can't come and send an email to Michelle and say, I'd like to talk about this, and we can place it within your report. In addition, there might be times where we're at the commission here and you suggest an item that is not on the agenda currently. We can certainly make a motion to place that on the next agenda. We have to be really careful about how we sort of flow through different subject matter to the Brown Act. So I think that's what I really wanted to do. In addition, I know there has been some talk in the community, and I know when I started, I would have loved my dream wish to include additional staff. Our budget currently is not going to allow for any new staff, at least this fiscal year. So I don't see us expanding staff. That's another reason why I would love us to not simply have meetings where Michelle has to put together agendas and create material and attend meetings when she could be working on some of the projects that she is working on. And some of the things, just to be very honest, that Michelle works on do not come before you, but she is working on a lot of different items. So I think that really sums up what I think you wanted me to come and speak about, as well as what I've heard from the community as a concern, especially with respect to meetings. So I'm available for any questions, and of course, if you want to open this up for the public to comment, I'm happy to address their questions as well.
Thank you. All right, questions from the committee?
I just have one question just to clarify what you were meaning by that. So I see on the agenda that there's no future agenda item on this agenda. There used to be. It sounds like we're still welcome to propose future agenda items in this committee.
Yes.
It's not a formal part of the agenda, but we're still welcome to do that.
Correct.
Yeah, all of the agendas citywide have changed so that number 7, the announcements, now also includes future agenda items, and that's listed in the description. So they all go within that item now instead of having its own title.
And what we'll do is, if, for instance, you would like to have another agenda, another idea that you're talking about, and we have to stop you because it's not on the agenda for Brown Act reasons, we can certainly look at them in the future. So I'm not precluding you from adding items. I'm taking some of that responsibility, respectfully, to set the agenda at the staff level and then bring it forward to both the vice chair and chair. And then during the meeting, of course, there is the future agenda items.
All right, we'll move on if there's any public comment.
Okay, sorry, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, in the room, we'll go first. Please go ahead.
So, hi, I'm Dr. Wendy Bernstein, and I just wanted to introduce myself to the committee. I'm a physician. I've been in Albany for 30 years, and I'm involved in an organization called Climate Health Now. And we're an almost 1,000-strong statewide organization focused on health sustainability and also climate health advocacy. So if you are needing a health speaker or needing information about a climate health topic, we're a potential resource.
If you don't mind giving us your contact so we can make sure we do outreach if we do need your assistance.
Well, Eric has it, but
Will you share that with us later, Eric? Okay, perfect.
Okay.
That's fine, thank you. I just want to make sure we don't miss out on that opportunity of an offer for volunteer information and help.
Okay, moving online, Nick Peterson, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the clarification on especially not making sure people aren't having meetings they don't necessarily need to have. So the climate science is pretty clear, and it's getting worse. There's a very rapidly shutting window on what can be done to actually have most effects, after which there could be these tipping points or worse, that it won't really matter what we do. We've doomed future generations to a much less supportive environment than we've had for the last couple million years. So this is serious stuff. It's a crisis. We need to, it's an all hands on deck thing. So the question, the complaint at least that I was making about canceled meetings wasn't that people should just sit around and twiddle thumbs, is that we really need to put some energy into making changes, and how do you do that? And I think we've only touched the tip of the iceberg on that. There are policy issues that could be put out that aren't going to be popular but need to be implemented and brought into place early and ramped up. You can't just wait till the last minute and try to ramp up 100% compliance with zero emissions. Something has to start happening now, and it's not. So it seems like this committee is the sole source of the ideas that are going to go to the city council to be promoted out and acted on by the community. And we need more of those ideas happening faster and making an impact on what's happening. Now, I'm not deluded in thinking that what Little Albany does is going to change climate change, but Little Albany is a rather privileged community in a First Nation that has created most of the problems. And it's up to us, if we can't meet our climate action plan requirements, if there aren't enough people, we need to find ways to get more people. I mean, it just doesn't seem like this is an attitude that is indicative of approaching a very serious and existential crisis. And that was sort of the point of saying, when you hear a meeting is canceled because there was nothing on the agenda, get something on the agenda, because we definitely need it. We'll come up with some for you. Thank you very much.
Lucinda Young, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I would strongly reiterate Nick Peterson's comments. We are in a climate emergency. When you're in an emergency, in a crisis, you have things that need to be dealt with. When we were in the middle of COVID, we wouldn't be canceling meetings because there's nothing on the agenda to talk about. So I think the cancellations send a message to the community. It certainly had the impact on me, and I know other members of the Albany Climate Action Coalition, that the city is not taking the climate emergency declaration seriously. So I think it's really important, and I think a purpose of this meeting also is to hear from the community. The city is committed to transparency, and I totally appreciate that we only have, we have very limited staff, and I'm disappointed to hear that there will not be another staff member added this year. We had Lizzie Camarade for quite a few years, and she has been gone for a couple years now, so there is definitely a need for more staff to work on this urgency. But, you know, we've got a lot of members in the community that are very, very concerned and want to step up, want it stepped up. And this committee is you're the ones that influence climate and send agenda to the city council. So what you're doing is very, very important. It's critical. And we need to see more action. Thank you.
There's no more public comment.
All right. Any discussion from the committee? Okay. Seeing none. Thank you, Dina, for coming in to speak. And we'll close
Thank you
that.
for having me.
Okay. Close that item, and I'll keep precedent we had a 5-minute break at the top of the hour. We'll come back in 5 minutes. all the great stuff we're doing towards achieving our climate goals. So we'll turn it over to Michelle to talk about CAAP EPI report.
That's right. It is that time of year again. And I think most of you were here for the last one. So it'll be a lot of the same themes, but some cool new data. So top line, our estimate for the 2024 citywide emissions was 44,745 metric tons of CO2, which is a drop from last year. That's 2.2 tons per capita, which is an all-time low. Asterisk to that, we do not have transportation data yet for this year. So that number could change by quite a bit potentially. As you may remember, a few years ago, we switched to using Google Environmental Insights information data for our transportation emissions inventory, and they're doing a little bit of a methodology review right now, and so we have not gotten data for 2024 yet, unfortunately. So, you know, that top line number is kind of in italics for now. But we still have lots of other interesting data to look at. I've just used our 2023 numbers as a proxy to sort of give us a sense of where we're at relative. So that's why it's sort of in that faded color on the right of the pie chart. Big change, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Does the 2023 include transportation?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, so we do have 2023 transportation data. In the chart on the right here, I've taken transportation out in the year-to-year comparison since we don't have 2024 data to compare it to.
Yeah, that's what I meant, the bar chart.
The bar chart. No, the bar chart does not include transportation data.
Okay, good. So we can take that as like apples to apples.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Ish, right? Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So this bar chart is showing us the changes that we do have data for 2023 to 2024. And the big line that you can see here is that there's been a really large drop in residential gas usage. Non-residential gas usage, we don't really have data for, so it's a proxy, but we're assuming it's similar.
What is off-road?
Off-road is everything that is vehicle or other gas-producing equipment that is not a car. So the majority of this is construction-related emissions. This is another one that can shift quite a bit from year to year, mostly based on how much construction we have in the city and sort of population changes, demographic changes. This is all modeled, but we saw less population growth and less construction. So that's why we're seeing a drop in off-road as well. And we also saw a drop in electricity in addition. Obviously, it's a pretty small chunk of that graph, but it did have a drop as well. So all good things there. And the pie chart shows that the gas sections have gotten smaller. Obviously, if the transportation numbers went down as well, then it starts to even out. So it's a little hard to say for sure, but it does seem clear that, well, it's very clear that gas usage dropped in 2024 quite a bit. So we're probably seeing that as a smaller proportion of our total emissions as well. This is our emissions over time chart. So the blue line here is the CAP goal, which has this sort of bent curve since the goal includes a faster rate of reductions starting in 2020. And then the orange line is our actual data. Again, this 2024 number you see here is assuming similar transportation emissions to last year. So still could change, but assuming it's pretty close to what we had last year, this is what we're looking at. And so, you know, you can see there's a pretty steep turn down there, getting sort of back onto that overall trend that we were having before the pandemic. In my last presentation last year, we were seeing this sort of flattening out and, you know, having a little bit of concern about that those reductions weren't coming quite as quickly. We bounced back from COVID and we're sort of flatlining. It seems hopeful that we've started to take that turn back downwards now. But obviously there's a fair amount of sort of year to year shifting in these numbers. And so really looking at that overall trend is the most helpful thing. There it goes. Okay, and this is emissions by source. Again, a similar chart here that just kind of shows over time. And this really highlights some of the big changes that we've made in the last 20 years now. You can see the purple section there is shrinking and shrinking until it's almost invisible. That's our electricity. And the switch to AVA energy and then to that base level of renewable 100 made a huge impact around 2018, 2019. We've seen the transportation section, that orange piece there, going down over time in general, but sort of flatlining out in the last few years. It will be really interesting to see what data we get when eventually we do get it. And then gas use has bounced around a little bit, but we have seen pretty consistent reductions over time, especially in the last few years. We'll get to that more in a minute. But I'll hand it over to Alicia now to talk a little bit about consumption-based emissions.
Yep. So, yeah, I know you guys have all been dying to hear me talk about, consumption-based inventories all night. But yeah, so I'm going to walk you through two different ways of kind of understanding Albany's carbon footprint. So we have two different consumption-based inventories this year in the KPI. So first we have Cool Climate, which you might remember from last year, and it looks at the emissions caused by the average Albany household's consumption habits. And this year we also have Climate Plans, which looks at emissions that are associated with the measured local activities in Albany over time. So first up, Cool Climate, which again, I'm sure most of you are familiar with. It measures emissions generated per household in Albany. And to understand the data, you need to first understand it's a consumption-based inventory, so it's going to be considering the life cycle and upstream emissions associated with everything we use. So transportation, housing, the food we buy, services, all of it. So it's factoring in the emissions a product produces before it even reaches Albany. I really like to use beef as an example. Before someone purchases beef at the Safeway in Albany, it's beginning its life as methane-producing cattle somewhere. It's getting, packaged and, broken down by industrial machinery. It's getting shipped by a truck from somewhere. It's getting stored in a distribution center, and then it comes to Albany. So all of those production factors are generating emissions. And essentially, this chart is taking all of that into account when it factors in, the total generated emissions associated with food that you can see here. So Cool Climate is taking that total life cycle and upstream emissions data of a product and combining that with national averages, median incomes, and census tract data on spending and use to kind of come up with an estimated per household emissions figure for a household in Albany. So it's pretty much making a general profile of how the typical household in Albany uses something like transportation, how it builds and maintains housing, how people purchase food, use services, and it's using that profile to then estimate how many emissions the average household is generating for each category. So, for example, Cool Climate is taking high numbers of self-reported BART and AC transit usage that's in our census tract data, and the high walkability score of our zip code, and it's lowering our per household transportation footprint accordingly. And then on the flip side, it sees our high median income level, it's seeing the average spending habits of households that have similar incomes in the Bay Area, and it's giving us a higher estimated carbon footprint associated with food and air travel. So overall, Cool Climate is just trying to give you an estimate of the full global chain of emissions that are triggered by the average Albany household. And that's a really useful tool to get residents to kind of understand the impact of their day-to-day life on emissions, inside Albany and outside Albany as well. I really like to think of this methodology for this chart as an equation. So, household emissions, global emissions, you can get that in this chart by taking the estimated household consumption and kind of marrying that with upstream and life cycle emissions. So, Climate Plans is slightly different. It takes a little bit of a different approach to calculating emissions. So instead of using national averages and income medians to kind of calculate household emissions estimates, it's using very specific localized Albany data to calculate citywide emissions. So we're shifting away from a per household look to more of a citywide, expansive look. For example, like in terms of housing, the national and regional grid averages that Cool Climate uses to calculate emissions in those categories are being replaced with very specific data on the city's metered energy use that reflects our partnership with like Ava Community Energy. And it's also highlighting our shift away from natural gas usage. And the transportation figures are actually taking into account our VMT, our traffic counts, and using those to calculate citywide emissions instead of just giving us an estimated figure based on census data or a zip code. So that kind of changes our previous equation a little bit to something that looks like this. So this chart is just taking local activity and calibrating it with life cycle emissions to give you citywide emissions. So because Climate Plans cares about local activities in Albany, it's only going to count upstream emissions that are tied to local activities. So something like electricity use is going to include emissions from power plants outside Albany, but air travel is not going to be in this chart because that's not a local activity the city can measure or have data for. So overall, Climate Plans is like less of a static profile and more of a reflection of real citywide performance. And I think that's really useful for our CAP. You know, if we build more bike lanes or if we subsidize the cost of BART for residents, the impact of those measures are not going to show up in census averages and the zip code-based data that Cool Climate is using. So it's not going to be apparent in that figure, you know, for a very long time. They are, however, going to really quickly show up in Albany's VMT, which is factored into something like the Climate Plans analysis. So I think that makes Climate Plans a really good chart in terms of tracking how well the CAP is doing, how well we're doing with our goals, and how well any of those associated policies are doing. So I think just to conclude differences between the two charts, I think Cool Climate does a really good job of telling us who we are in terms of household emissions, and Climate Plans tells us how we're doing overall as a city. So both charts have really good insights when it comes to, you know, improving our emissions policies and working towards the achievement of CAP, but they do them in different ways.
I'll just add really quickly while we're on this. I always find this one so interesting because the scale of consumption-based emissions is so much higher than the scale of our you know, community inventory, the top line number I showed you at the beginning there. Especially for a place like Albany, consumption is really the most important way that we have an impact on the climate. Of course, it's something that's a little harder for the city to design policies around. And so we're limited in some ways at what we can do here in this room, but it's a really important thing to keep in mind. Okay, now to shift back into our more specific community inventory of the emissions that go up into the sky from Albany specifically. I'll talk a little bit more about buildings here, and this is where we really saw the biggest change this year. We saw a 14% decrease in residential gas use in 2024, which is, I mean, just a huge, huge number. We haven't seen a drop like that since 10 years ago in 2013. And even more exciting, there's a even further 1% drop in our preliminary data for 2025. So it looks like it's not just a blip or like a data error or something. I'm still trying my best to understand exactly what the reasons are behind this huge drop. With huge swings like this, usually weather is a really big factor. But it's not clear exactly how much of it is related to weather and how much of it is related to building improvements, electrification, energy efficiency, even things like smart thermostats, et cetera. So I'm still trying to understand that. I don't know how much of it is going to be able to parse through the data. But what we do know is that the overall decline we've had in the last 7 or so years now is clearly not just weather. We know that we've increased the installation of heat pumps and heat pump water heaters. We know that a lot of houses have increased their energy efficiency and insulation. So, you know, when we see these long-term trends, we know that, you know, weather isn't that consistently going down year over year. So there's definitely a lot of positive progress that's happening. And, you know, in addition to that, the rate, I'll show you the chart in a minute, but the rate of adoption of electrification technologies has really just skyrocketed. And so I'm not super surprised to see this line get steeper and steeper over time. Electricity is a little bit interesting. We saw a 7% drop in 2024, but then an increase of almost the same amount last year. So it's behaving a little bit differently than gas. This is an interesting one where we're expecting as electrification proceeds that we will have more electricity use overall, but also the electric appliances are much more efficient. So, it starts to even out a little bit. And to be honest, we're really not sure what to expect, even if we have full-scale electrification in the city. So really the main thing we're looking at is just the decrease in gas over time. That's sort of the most important top-line number for us. This is some data about our permits, as I was mentioning. We've really just seen a huge amount of growth in the popularity of heat pumps. HVAC systems in particular made up 82% of our HVAC permits. Sorry, that's supposed to say 2025. And water heaters have really skyrocketed last year too. They made up 59% of water heater permits. We do have more people getting water heater installs without permits in the city than we see that with HVAC. So that's definitely not an accurate number for overall water heater installations, but it's still showing us that trend. So we've seen that really take a leap. The curve for HVACs is starting to steady out a little bit, which we would expect as we start to get to those really high numbers. We're starting to get into homes where there's maybe more kind of logistical challenges with electrification. Maybe there's more financial challenges. So I'm not surprised to see it slow a bit, but it's really exciting to see that we're getting to those really high percentages. We've also had a huge amount of solar installed, over 3,500 kilowatts since 2016. And last year in particular, we saw a huge surge, more than double battery storage installations in Albany homes. That I think is most likely due to change in state laws about how solar power is repaid through the grid. So it really incentivizes battery storage systems. But that's great news in terms of resiliency as well. So exciting to see that data. And then electric vehicles, more good news on this front. Electric vehicles now make up over 12% of our vehicle population. And we actually saw a surge to 40% of vehicle sales in 2024, which beat out Alameda County as a whole, which is kind of exciting. We don't usually do that. So you'll see here on this chart on the right that Alameda County and the state of California have data for 2025. We don't have that data for Albany yet. So TBD, their economic conditions as well as the ending of incentives that led to those numbers dropping a bit. I would not be surprised if the same thing happens in Albany, but we will have to wait and see. Okay, hand it off to, sorry, this one's still mine. Transportation, I won't go into too much. As I said, we don't have data for this year. This is the last few years. We did see a bit of a rise in vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, in the last couple of years. So we're waiting anxiously to find out where we're at for 2024, but we think the growth in transit ridership might be a positive sign, and I'll let Alicia talk about that.
Yeah, so as we all remember, between January and April of 2020, Albany's BART ridership dropped 95%. So very dramatic decrease, but since then it's kind of been slowly climbing back up. But there's definitely some ebbs and flows that tends to be, because of the seasons. There's more ridership during the spring and summer, less during the fall and winter. That tends to be consistent across BART and AC Transit. Overall, ridership has been increasing gradually over the course of 2021 all the way up until now. It started leveling out a little bit in 2024. We were at about 40% of pre-pandemic levels. But as of 2025, BART ridership has peaked at 60% of pre-pandemic levels. So it seems to be kind of continuing its steady upward trend. AC transit also has continued to kind of increase slowly. Just over about 50% of 2019 levels, we've seen some growth this year after a kind of stagnant 2023. The growth in ridership was due almost entirely to the construction of the University Village. That has really increased the popularity of the 52 line to UC Berkeley's campus, as well as the popularity of about the 5 or 6 stops that are within the UC Village that riders can get on at. So while the total figure for AC transit ridership in 2025 is currently unavailable, we have pending data for fall and winter, so we don't have firm numbers for it yet. The figures for the spring and summer quarters already indicate an increase over the same quarters in 2024. So we already have more riders than the same quarters from the previous year. So hopefully if that stays consistent, then we'll have another increase in ridership for 2025. And also interesting to note that the ridership from the UC Village composes 39% of ridership in the spring and summer quarters. So like almost 50% of AC transit riders during that time period are from the UC Village. So decent amount. So waste. We also, again, this year looked at citywide waste. We looked at the waste mix. As of 2025, the decrease has continued with tonnages for all 3 categories tracking slightly lower than the previous year. So landfill tonnage per person has also decreased slightly. So we're at kind of an all-time low, I think, of about 1.1 pounds per person a day. So this trend overall is kind of suggesting that we're having an overall reduction in citywide waste generation, which is great. Next slide. Also with municipal waste, it's dropped again in 2020 because of work from home, but it's been rebounding since then. But the overall tonnage has kind of been flattening below 2019 levels. In 2025, we had a significant drop in landfill levels and an increase in organics, as well as a little bit of an increase in recycling. That could, mostly be explained by more compostable foodware at things like city events, and associated like better sorting education and things of that nature.
Also on the municipal front, we switched all of our municipal electricity accounts to Renewable 100 back in 21. So we've had no electricity emissions since then. Our gas data has been pretty steady for the most part, but we did see again a large drop in 2024, about 20% actually, similar to the data we saw in the rest of the city. So I attached to the agenda packet a whole spreadsheet of all of our CAP actions with progress updates. This is just a few of the highlights here, most of which we've talked about. We are in the middle of updating or developing a new active transportation plan, which came to this committee a few months back. We've amended our zoning ordinance for higher density development. We're working on electric vehicle adoption in a variety of ways. We have also lots of things going on related to building electrification, in particular our gas line decommissioning program and our rebate program. The sustainable foodware ordinance has been adopted. We're in the middle of implementation right now. We continue to work on things related to sharing, repair and reuse economies, the circular economy, reducing waste in that way. And we've completed the street tree management plan and we're in progress of implementation of that plan now. So lots of progress has been made. That slide disappeared. There was a conclusion slide in here which has somehow disappeared, but I can give you a conclusion off the cuff anyways. So, a lot of this data we've been seeing for years. We know that transportation and buildings are the biggest source of emissions, particularly natural gas. We've been working on those things very actively. I think, this reduction we saw this year for natural gas is really good to see, and especially that it's gone into 2025 as well. Like I mentioned, it could go back up. There could be weather-related things. We can't get too closely tied to a single year's data, but it's continuing this trend we've seen where it seems that we're making strides, not just in electrification, but in all the other things that reduce our gas use. And reminds us also that we really need to keep working at that And we're starting to get to the point with heat pumps in particular, where this is now the norm. Most people are installing heat pumps, but there's still that 20% that are struggling with it for one reason or another. We're gonna start getting to that higher hanging fruit now on some of these things. So that's important for us to keep in mind. Obviously, transportation is, over half of our total emissions. There's a lot of things we're doing on that front, not just with the active transportation plan, but with ongoing projects, mostly led by Public Works, to change our actual city infrastructure, as well as outreach and education. It's promising to see that our public transit usage has increased a bit in the last year, and we're starting to eke our way closer to those pre-pandemic levels, but there's still a lot of work to be done there. I mean, it just took a huge hit during COVID and really hasn't rebounded yet. So that's a big thing to keep our eye on. And I think there's been really promising progress both with EVs and waste in the last couple of years. The waste numbers haven't moved dramatically, but we've seen steady declines in waste. And, that's hard to do because the world we live in is full of plastic. So, we're seeing better diversion, we're seeing reduction in overall waste, and we're seeing a continued increase in EV adoption, especially in those sales numbers, which is cool to see. Those are always the ones that change faster because the population only turns over every so many years. So that's all good news, but obviously still a lot of work to be done. And now we'll take questions.
Any questions?
When do we get the 2025 data, I guess, or the latest data?
So there's a bit of a lag in the inventory data. So I'm hoping that we'll get 2024 transportation data sometime in the next few months. We don't really have a deadline on that. We're just sort of waiting. 2025 data becomes available at different points for different pieces of it. So the electricity data usually isn't available until like fall or so. And then transportation data for 2025, I wouldn't expect until probably early next year. So that's why we do this in the spring. It's usually the time that we've gotten all the data for the year and a bit before.
When you were going over the cool climate, and then the other, I can't remember the name of the other.
Climate plans.
Climate science. Was that to say that we are choosing one or the other as a way of measuring monitoring, or is it a blend, or what are we doing with?
Yeah, I would say it's a blend. We're not choosing one over the other. They both kind of present different ways of understanding emissions in the city, so it's just they're both there to kind of help facilitate a better understanding through two different viewpoints. Yeah.
Okay.
And they're both created by different entities, not by us. So we're just kind of looking at what they've, calculated and analyzing it.
Right.
Yeah.
I appreciate your comment about, it seemed to me one of them was based on per capita income or income levels in similar communities, and then local programs would be harder to measure. So I appreciated your comment that, using the other methodology gives us that ability to track more locally. So hopefully we can continue using that for things that, like you were just showing with local gas usage and things. So.
I had one question on the climate plans data. Does it include both like upstream and direct emissions like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so both of them do. Both of them, as consumption-based inventories, are going to have upstream and life cycle emissions. It's just the difference between the two of them is how they're kind of taking those into account when they're showing you the full emissions estimate. Like the climate plans analysis really only cares about upstream and life cycle emissions that are tied to what's happening in Albany, but the cool climate analysis is looking at the upstream emissions tied to just anything that somebody in a household does in Albany that generates emissions. So that's why it gives you kind of a more global look, because it's factoring emissions in, from things that happen way outside of Albany, like air travel, is a good example, but yeah. So they both take them into account.
Yeah, I think the climate plans is it's just it's a bit more specific and does a better job of looking at really what's happening in Albany more specifically. You know, they're all modeled, and so there are going to be limitations to any of these. But yeah, climate plans is being a little bit closer to reality in a way, and it's also looking over time, which is helpful as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point also, is that something like Cool Climate is going to be a lot more static than climate plans, because Cool Climate is giving you these big blocks of data, right, in that bar graph. Like, you can't see over time how services is maybe changing or transportation, but with the climate plans analysis, it's showing you everything over time. So that's why it's really good for understanding like policy changes. If something really big happens that can impact our VMT positively or negatively, you'll see that very clearly in climate plans. So yeah, kind of the benefit of it.
One more reflective question I had. Now that we've done this kind of report a number of years in a row, are there any indicators that you feel are missing that would help kind of fill in the picture of how we're doing?
That's a great question. I'll brag a little bit and say that I saw some and added them in a few years back. And, you know, I'm always kind of keeping a lookout for that. One of the big ones was when I began tracking our permit data, because that was not initially in the KPI report. And that's really helpful because it's one of the very few things that we have extremely specific, actually real data for, that is just Albany itself, and it's not modeled in any way. And so that's been really useful. You know, also looking at solar and battery storage and that sort of thing. One other thing that I've begun looking at, and I'm still kind of in the process of working through, so I wasn't able to put it into this report, is looking at weather data to try and understand if there's a way to tell how much of that gas usage data is weather driven versus driven by home improvements. You know, based on the work I've done so far, it's not like a 1-to-1 ratio. It's not super duper clear, but I am hoping that I can get to a better understanding of that. That's going to help us, you know, see where we're at in a better way, and hopefully shine a light on some of the work that's been done that isn't in our permit data, because there's a lot of things that homes can do to reduce their gas usage that don't show up in permits that are sort of more minor. And so I'm hoping that I can get some of that, but it is a bit tricky, so we'll see.
Any more questions? Okay, if not, we'll turn it over to public comment.
Okay, we don't have anyone in the room. Lucinda Young, please go ahead.
Thank you, Michelle, and a new Civic Sparks fellow. I apologize, I'm not recalling your name, but excellent presentation. Particularly good to hear from our Civic Sparks fellow this evening. I always love these presentations, Michelle, that you do every year or every 2 years, I can't remember. And I see a lot of good news. I also see areas that we need to work on. I think this gives us a really good baseline as to where the areas that we're not making progress in, and which should really help us plan for what we need to focus on. Looks like transportation, again, is really the area that we need to work on most. And it is encouraging that, you know, we saw a surge in EV sales in 2024. However, I think it's almost certain that we're going to see a drop off in 2025 after the EV $7,500 EV new tax credit and $4,000 used EV tax credit ended. So it'll be interesting to see what happens after that. Of course, if gas prices continue with the war, maybe we'll get an increase. Maybe that's one positive. I have one question something I didn't understand for the climate plans graph. I don't know if it's possible to pull that up. Is it too much trouble to pull that graph up again? The climate plans graph?
Yeah, just give me a moment.
Or if it's too much trouble, it was a graph over time from 2007 to 2023, and it looked, let's see, yeah, that one, number 7. And it looks like it's flat, basically. I mean, a few ups and downs, but what it appears from that is that our emissions have not changed much between 2007 and 2023. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, basically.
Okay. Which to me says we're not making the kind of progress that we need to make. That's what I was confused about, because on some of the other metrics, it looks like, I mean, obviously our heat pump adoption is up, our residential gas is down. So how do we explain that the climate plans is showing that we're not making progress? Our transportation, housing, our emissions in all these categories is, with a few blips up and down, is basically the same. Anyway, that was a concern I had, a question. Let's see. I think the heat pump rebate progress is incredible. I think we are going to see a drop off.
Sorry, Lucinda, I know you can't see the timer, but the time is up. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Sorry about that. Nick Peterson, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for this report. It's always great to see this. I wish there were more people attending and really seeing how our progress is going. I'm not sure if the website under climate action shows this most current data as at least the main one with the declining, with our goal and with the declining line on the emissions. Which sort of seconds Lucinda's question, which is that chart seems to show that our emissions are trending down, whereas the emissions, I think we're misreading what that more flat chart was showing of emissions inventory, where it doesn't seem to change at all. So yeah, answering that question would be nice, but I encourage you to put this, at least the main chart, which reflects the goal chart in the Climate Action Adaptation Plan, up on the webpage so people can see that. My thoughts on the gas usage declining is actually, I'm pretty encouraged that I think electrification is starting to reflect into that. Although I know we had issues before, if you go back to around 2013, there was some really warm weather and you could just see people weren't using. I mean, most Albany homes have, well, hopefully it's changing, but use gas for heating. So one of the benefits we're getting from having warmer winters is that we're using less gas to heat our homes as climate change impacts. And we've had some really warm, especially late winter, like in February, it's been quite warm. So that was good. The other thing that was surprising was the electric use. I imagine that was just total electric use, not electric use related to which was generated by unsustainable methods. So if it's just overall electric use, yes. I mean, there's a lot more. What I found was when I got electric vehicles, my electric use doubled because I was always charging at home. And electric vehicles use a lot of electricity. So you would think with the amount of electrical vehicles we're seeing adopted in Albany, you'd start to see a climb in electricity, not only from electrification, but from transferring off of gasoline to using electric power mainly from home. So that one's a real head scratcher for me. But it used to be you could get information from the DMV by zip code of what type of vehicles were registered, and I wonder if you're using that to see how many are in the 94706 area. Thank you very much. Thank you, 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 very much. Thank you
We have no further comment. I might start with those ones just while they're fresh in my mind, if you don't mind. I was just going to say, yes, the vehicle data is from the DMV, and that chart was total electrical use. We also have data on emissions, so the majority of the electricity doesn't have any emissions tied to it, but there is some, so there's a distinction there. But yeah, there's definitely increases coming from EV charging for sure. Okay, you want to start with the climate plans?
Yeah, so just to address why maybe looking at climate plans, it looks like there's a lot less change happening citywide. I think that really just comes down to the fact that climate plans is, again, it's taking into account real data that's coming from Albany, right? Like our VMT, our metered energy usage, Clipper data, the full income bracket of households in Albany, et cetera. So it's very hard, to kind of get all of the people in Albany who have data that is coming into those reports to buy into, the policy measures that we're doing under KALB and the sustainability measures that we're enforcing. That's going to take a lot of time. Even if we've gotten, kind of into it in the last 10 years or so, it's going to take a long time for it to really show, in a clear way on something like the climate plan's emissions inventory. So, it's going to probably, I would say, look like this for a while until all of the measures that we've been implementing through KALB gain momentum. And it just, again, comes down to, we have to get more people in Albany on board with it, and the more people that start to do things that will bring down the total emissions, the more it will reflect here. So it's all just a process, and it's going to take a long time for the city. And again, this is citywide, so it's like everybody in Albany jumbled into one inventory. So it's going to take a long time for that total inventory to reflect what's happening in the CAP.
Yeah, I'll also just add that, with consumption-based inventories, there's a huge amount of influence from, the world economy at large that we don't have as much impact over. So some of this stuff, there's no policy answer for us as Albany. And it's going to kind of move with the whims of the rest of the world in various ways. And, the decreases that we see in the community inventory are just a small percentage of what's happening in here. Obviously, transportation is one that's a little bit more closely tied to, the actual car travel in the city, but there's a lot of other pieces of transportation that get included there. Housing is another one that that includes natural gas emissions, but it also includes a whole variety of other things related to, the embodied carbon of homes and et cetera, et cetera. And so you're just not going to see those shifts as clearly in a graph like this. We do see some slight downward trends in a few of these over time. And I'll note that this is, again, for the city as a whole. So as the city population grows, the per capita numbers will decrease a little bit more. So that's something to keep in mind. We've had a growing population, so anytime you see a flat line, that is sort of progress in a way, if you choose to look at it that way. So just a few other notes to keep in mind. But yeah, what Alicia said is, this chart is going to take a much longer time to shift significantly than the chart that we produce for our own inventory every year.
So I think that the question, and it popped my question in my mind, was this chart versus the greenhouse gas, the carbon emissions to goal, showing a market decrease, that one. So these are different measures. They're just based on different sets.
Yes.
That's the
Yeah.
the
So
answer.
this
Okay.
chart is, this is our community inventory. So this is only calculating, cars that are driving in Albany,
Yeah, okay.
natural gas emissions that are going out of your heater in Albany. It's not going to count, the methane from the cow that you ate for dinner. Yeah, yeah.
Great.
Are we in discussion?
Yeah, we'll move to discussion.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
There yet, or I guess we're still about that.
Yeah, let's close. Okay, no more public comments, and now open for discussion.
I want to thank you again for the great information and Just to point out that these kind of things where we actually we have programs that have been in place for a couple of years, and we have decreases that are directly at least correlated with that, maybe, is another great opportunity to inform the residents of Albany and promote that as positive factors that the city is doing. Your tax money is going into these rebates, and here's the impact it's having towards our community goals. And I think that this really, it's great work that you're doing, and we need to get that message out to the residents. So, I just wanted to point out, gas emissions decrease, EV ownership increase, BART ridership increase, rebate programs, the progress to the CAP goals. I think there's so much negative information that people get. It's a little bit of that despair factor where you're just like, it's not even worth, dealing with, or, I can't do anything. So I think we just have to keep that communication back to the residents of, hey, we are doing programs, they are working, here's our, we're making progress on this. And not to be Pollyanna or anything, not to say, like, hey, everything's great, but just to, to reinforce that action has influence. And so again, I think, I'm kind of using this as a little bit of a stumping post for our proposal that's coming up later, is just, getting more communication back to the community. And you're doing a fantastic job. But, to Nick's point, yeah, we should put it on the city website, but I think we need to be active about this communication. It needs to be pushed out to the community.
Troy, I'll just note that we're 5 minutes from the end of the meeting if we need to extend.
Yeah, let's see. Well, push it out a little bit. I'll make a motion to extend 10 minutes to 10 p.m.
Second.
Extend 15 minutes, you mean?
Or extend
9:10.
out to 9:10.
Okay, to 9:10. Okay. Member Rochers? Member Larson?
Yes.
Member Bierce?
Yes.
Member Melgen?
Yes.
Chair Hodges?
Yes. Okay, great. No more discussion. Thanks again for a great update on Albany's climate Spotify Wrapped. And we'll move on to subcommittee updates. Starting first with Zero Emission Transportation Subcommittee. Okay, yeah. I think we had met, I'll just give a little brief, we had met a little bit to discuss the future wind down, the wind down of the committee and the different ways we wanted to kind of plant seeds for new ideas. But I think we'll come back next month when Dan is here as well, because I know he had some particular interests in some of the new sprouting potential subcommittees off of this committee. Okay, so with that, we'll move on to the staffing subcommittee.
So Eric and I met once, and we have a proposed job description for whenever there is budget available for a full-time staffer, which I know may not be this year, but we do have a job description for that. Sent to Michelle, it's in her inbox, so we have that ready for review whenever you want.
Okay. Would you like to give an overview, or?
I mean, I didn't memorize it exactly, but I think that one of the key points that I think is worth noting on the budget question is if you want the staff person to be able to apply for grants or not, because part of the role, the role is funded by tax dollars, right? But there may be an ability to offset some of that cost to taxpayers by having applying for grants. So should that be part of the job description? Is it part of the skills that they should have or not? That's a good question. And then I think the communication to the community is definitely key, because websites don't just get people by themselves, SEO and all these tools like this. You have to push marketing to the community about what you're doing. So a lot of ways you can do that, and we are doing some of that right now, but really taking an effort to be more outgoing communications to change behavior, like we say, we need to change behavior, and also to help with cross-department coordination, because reducing silos and improving collaboration. I know that a lot of folks in the city are doing this already, but it's not really seen by communities being a thing. Like, we don't really see that as much, so helping to communicate what collaboration is already happening could be one aspect of that too.
And so So what we would like to do, I think, for next meeting is to make sure that it's circulated with the agenda. I mean, I think that, right, so circulate with the agenda so that we can discuss it as the committee next meeting, so as an agenda item.
Yeah, exactly. And what else on the topics? I think we probably agenda next step. Yeah, getting a next meeting.
Because what I'd like to achieve, and totally second what Catherine said, but as far as the budget and the staffing, I still think, and it was harder to make this case. I was like, went off about how you make a good case and then money will follow. But I understand that there's budget constraints. But I really think that the committee should review this in terms of, the fact that we do have a climate declaration, an emergency declaration, and that we really need to look at this as an opportunity for extraordinary action and direct action to the community is where it's needed. And I'd like to get feedback from the committee. Is it a strong enough argument before we, vote to send it to City Council? So that's what I'd like to talk about next meeting.
And I am happy to put that on there. I just want to let you know that our budget does not have any room for any new positions. We're in a different position than we were many years ago for various reasons. But we are not in a position now, because I went to that question about 8 months ago. It was a maybe. But as we've sort of peeled back this budget, it's just, there's nothing in there for me to be able to get somebody. And in response to grants, there are opportunities. Part of what staff always struggles with is administration of the grant. And it's like a full-time position just to administer the grant and not even get any project work done. So I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news, and happy to have more discussions with this. I just don't see the financial support for it right now.
Also wanted to add that for context, the staff subcommittee started as a result of the climate action plan, like, do we need to update it or not question. And the thing we came up with was that we don't need to update it like per se. It's a good document, it's got a great strategy, we have these great ideas. We should need to go do it and actually get the time and staff and resources to do that. And the obstacle is not lack of ideas or metrics, the lack is resources. So just wanted to mention that as a context.
Okay. Any questions from the rest of the committee on the subcommittee updates? Okay, seeing none, we can move if there's any public comment on the subcommittee updates.
Yeah, would you like to reduce the time, considering we only have 10 minutes left?
Oh, sure, yeah. Let's do 1 minute.
Lucinda Young, please go ahead.
I actually had not raised my hand. Or maybe it was up from last time. I'm given the time constraints, I'm not going to comment.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, no public comment then.
Okay.
Oh, actually, sorry, one just popped up. Nick Peterson, please go ahead.
Well, I'll do my plug about really needing a climate champion within the city staff. I think Michelle does a heroic job, but her position is more supportive, so we need someone at a decision level making point really champions our efforts on climate change. I do not really see it happening that much. So, the incentive programs have been really successful, but at some point we're going to have to implement some stick, and the trending will flatten out as we get to what Michelle mentioned, are the harder to reach changes. So we need to think about that. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you. No more public comment.
Okay. Any discussion on the updates? Okay. Let's then move on to announcements and requests for future agenda items.
Okay. Let's see. I don't have a whole lot of announcements today. I will note that we went to the City Council couple of weeks ago and got additional funding for the heat pump rebate program. I'll probably come back pretty soon and get into more depth about that. But it's been very successful, especially with lower and moderate income folks. And so we've run out of the allotted money pretty quickly, spending it on lots of good things, and received more funding from council for that. I'll also note there's no meeting in April. I will be out of town, so we've gone ahead and canceled that meeting. So just to note that, we do plan on having a meeting in May, as far as I know. Any other announcements you have? Okay. Any other announcements from the committee before we head to future agenda items?
Heat Pump Week from Building Income Coalition is coming up April 11th to 19th. SF Climate Week, coming up, lots of events in the Bay Area, April 18th, 26th. The Broward Center in Berkeley is leading electrification fair on April 25th in the afternoon as well.
Okay, seeing no other announcements, future items. So I guess first the public.
Yeah, we can do the public first.
Okay.
That's fine.
Comments on future agenda items.
Nick Peterson, please go ahead. So sorry. Okay, Nick Peterson.
Thank you. I heard recently that what's known as the Albany Bowl project has pulled permit. And I think it would be kind of nice to get an update for the Climate Action Committee on whether some of this high-density housing, there've been about 3 or 4 that were approved, and then with the increase in interest costs sort of delayed. So I think that would be a good item to have presented to the CAC, so at least we see that there's some progress in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Lucinda Young, please go ahead.
Yes, again, there's delay in unmuting. First, I just want to announce that this Sunday from 3 to 5, the Albany Library is hosting a climate film festival. It's a series of, it's 10 very short climate films. So I'm hoping that you'll help spread the word and perhaps even some of you attend. Some things that I would like to see, future agenda items. I've been following SB 1221 and what's happening with that. I've had a little bit of email communication with Michelle over that. Michelle wrote a really great email of support to CPUC, and I'd like to see some more support, perhaps from this committee and from other members of city staff supporting SB 1221. I'd also like to have some more information about Measure DD transparency.
Sorry, Lucinda, that's the end of the time. Apologize. Thank you. Okay, we have 4 minutes left.
Okay, moving on to items from the committee.
I got 5 items. 1, Resilience Hub. 2, bioswales. Someone to talk about that could be greening projects, and or someone from Vancouver. I can introduce you. 3, flood reduction through rain capture. James at Heal Arts Lab would be a presenter. 4, waste management. Talking about the fees charged for waste to help incentivize reduction of landfill. It is $66 for 32 gallons or $60 for 20 gallons. There's not a big difference between the smallest and medium size. We can probably make the differential larger to incentivize lower use of trash. And then 5th, the staffing piece. If we can't pay for full-time, we're not an intern. Thank you.
Any others? Okay.
I just wanted to make sure that the staffing position, what we write up will be disseminated to the committee, and then we can have it as an agenda item next time, our next meeting, right? That was your 5th item.
The staffing is separate. So there's both. One, our staff piece, the full-time employee option. Since there may not be budget, option 2, Civic Spark Fellow, intern, some other kind of options we could explore, part-time, something. I also, at the risk of being unpopular here, I would like to request a meeting with Dina Tassini for leading the April meeting. So if Michelle is out, if Dina can lead that, that'd be great. I understand there has to be city staff available for advisory council meetings to be able to meet. So if there's someone able, maybe Alicia can lead the meeting, I don't know. But if there's a way to have a meeting happen in April with a staff member who is in town, that would be really great. Thank you.
All right.
Then I just had a question. Is the presentation that you did today on the CAP, is that available publicly?
Well, it's posted right now in the agendas and minutes. I will be updating our CAP main page with that new information soon.
All right. Seeing no more comments from the committee, I will close out this meeting. Thanks everyone for coming tonight.